I, 49 male, have been married to my wife, 48 female, for almost 25 years. We've been together since our freshman year of high school, and I always knew that I was going to get married to her. We even have a 24-year-old daughter. Like any other married couple, we've had our fair share of ups and downs, but it's mostly been ups. My wife is a very shy and sweet woman, and I really like that about her because I'm the same way. But recently, we got into a huge fight, and she's been acting very strange after that. Even the thing that we fought about was rather weird, and I still can't imagine why she'd pick something like that to fight about. So, I have a niece who's just over a year younger than my own daughter. She's around 22 years old and is my older brother's daughter. My brother was 6 years older than me, and we were inseparable growing up despite the age gap. Unfortunately, my brother passed away 2 years ago in an accident. It was devastating for all of us, but life goes on. Of course, my niece, my sister-in-law, and I were affected the most, and for a year after his death, I would visit them every weekend with my daughter to make sure they were all right. I tried to get my wife to come along, but she always had some excuse, so I stopped trying eventually. I didn't want to push her harder because my wife said that she didn't want to intrude on our grief since she felt like this loss was way too personal. And since she wasn't very close to my brother, she'd feel very awkward and insincere trying to be part of something where she obviously didn't fit in. I didn't think that was a good explanation, but I didn't push further. With time, my sister-in-law and I did become even closer friends, and I did try to provide my niece with the comfort she'd always received from her father so that she wouldn't feel alone. I felt awful for the poor girl because I had a daughter her age, and I couldn't even fathom how she'd feel if I just stopped existing one day. So I tried my best to be there for her, and I think she started looking up to me as a father figure of sorts because a few days ago, she asked me to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, which happens to be 3 weeks away. I'll be honest, I did think she would ask me, and I'd always thought that I'd say yes because it would be an honor to walk her down the aisle. It's what my brother would have wanted, so I didn't think twice before saying yes, and I thought that my wife would be just as happy about it as well because she seemed to like my niece too. But for some reason, when I told my wife that I'd agreed to walk my niece down the aisle at her wedding, she totally flipped out at me. She started screaming at me, saying that this was supposed to be a sacred moment that was only supposed to be shared by a father and daughter, not an uncle and his niece. She said a lot of other things as well, implying that I was trying to replace my brother, and I thought that was incredibly out of line. She even said that I was being selfish and hadn't even considered how my own daughter would feel when she'd come to know that I'd agreed to walk my niece down the aisle. She said that my daughter would feel awful if my first time walking someone down the aisle would be with my niece and not my own daughter, which I don't think is true at all. It was really out of character for my wife to start screaming at me about something so weird. And I was really caught off guard by her behavior, so much so that I didn't even know how to react. I let her scream at me without even trying to defend myself because I was hurt by what she'd said about me trying to replace my brother. And after she was done, I went to the guest room and locked myself in for the next couple of hours. She didn't even try to talk to me or apologize, which made me feel even worse because I really didn't think any of this was my fault. If she disagreed with whatever I'd done, she could have tried to talk things through with me calmly instead of screaming at me and hurling accusations at me like that. To call it an overreaction would be an understatement. But she did have a point about my daughter feeling bad. She and my niece were very close friends, and my daughter was supposed to be her maid of honor at the wedding. But I hadn't actually considered how she might feel about me walking my niece down the aisle before her. In spite of their friendship, she might feel bad, so I decided to ask her if she was okay with it. I called her up an hour after the fight, once I'd calmed down, and told her about what my niece had asked. My daughter was thrilled and told me that she was glad I'd said yes, even though I hadn't even told her that I'd said yes yet. She then told me that my niece had already asked her if she'd be okay with me walking her down the aisle, and she'd obviously said yes because that's what my uncle would have wanted. I was relieved to know that my daughter didn't have a problem with me walking my niece down the aisle, because that just showed how close they were, just like my brother and I. Knowing that I'd cleared things up with my daughter, I knew that there was nothing wrong with what I'd agreed to. My wife's reaction was completely baseless and very hurtful, so I decided to confront her about it and give her a piece of my mind, because she couldn't just yell at me without any reason. So at dinner, I told her about the conversation that I'd had with my daughter and said that since my daughter was okay with it, I decided to go ahead with what I'd agreed to do already. I also told her that the remark she'd made about me wanting to replace my brother was very insensitive, and I expected an apology for it. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down on what she'd said already, which was really very shocking. At least she didn't scream at me the second time around. We ended up getting into a really heated argument, which ended with her saying that she'd leave me if I walked my niece down the aisle. I literally had nothing to say to her after that, and so we haven't spoken for 3 days now, because neither of us is willing to admit that they were in the wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with me walking my niece down the aisle, and if my daughter herself doesn't mind it, then I don't think my wife should have a problem with it either. Mainly because her whole argument was based around it being something sacred that only a father and daughter are meant to share. I don't think that's true at all, which is why I'm not willing to budge. But I also don't want to lose my wife over something like this. I really don't. I love my wife, despite whatever has been happening for the past 3 days. I've only loved her my entire life, and these few days have been hardest to deal with. I don't know how she's doing it. Heck, I don't even know how I'm doing it, but something needs to happen soon. I can't imagine a life without her, and I don't think I'd be happy if she actually did leave me. So any and all advice or opinions are welcome right now. AITA for wanting to walk my niece down the aisle even though my wife is against it? Update 1. It's been 5 days since our big fight and I still haven't spoken to her. Neither has she spoken to me. We're living in the same house, but it's like there's an invisible barrier between us. If I enter the living room, she leaves and vice versa. It sucks. And I know she feels bad about this as well. I heard her sobbing in the bedroom last night when I woke up to use the loo. It broke my heart. And I wanted to go and comfort her so bad, but I just couldn't. I didn't know how to. Sure, we've had fights before, but none as serious as this. This just sucks. I'm going to give it another day and then I'll talk to her myself because I just can't stand this distance and bitterness anymore. I want us to be normal again. Update 2. Okay, so I'd planned to speak to my wife today, but she surprised me by waking me up with breakfast in bed today. I mean, you can imagine how stunned I was by that after almost 6 whole days of not speaking to each other. I was already pretty drowsy since I'd just woken up, so it was hard enough to make sense of things, and on top of that, she'd totally thrown me off by doing something like this, even though we'd been fighting and ignoring each other for the past 5 days. So once again, I stayed silent while she talked to me while serving me. She apologized to me for the remark that she'd made about me wanting to replace my brother and said that she really did regret saying it as soon as those words had left her mouth. She didn't mean it, and she'd just been so angry that she didn't think things through. When I asked her what exactly she'd been so mad about in the first place, she stiffened up a little and it didn't go unnoticed. She told me that she definitely would tell me the reason, but she just didn't feel ready to share that with me yet. Clearly, She was embarrassed of the reason, but I didn't understand what it could have been that had led to this degree of embarrassment. It must have been something pretty bad, and while she hadn't told me exactly what it was yet, she's promised me that she will tell me. And she'll tell me about it soon, just as soon as she feels ready, because she's been carrying this secret around for years. I'm really intrigued. And I even tried to persuade her to tell me, but she said that she would and requested me not to pressure her. So I didn't push harder. It's been a good day, and I really don't want to ruin it by getting into another fight. I'm honestly just happy that my wife and I are speaking once more because, like I said, she means the world to me, and I would hate to imagine life without her by my side. She apologized to me for threatening to leave me as well, because even she admitted that she'd be miserable and lost without me. We've been together for over 3 decades. That's a very long time. So no matter what her reason is, I know I'll forgive her, and I can tell you for sure that she'd do the same for me. I know a lot of people won't be happy about what I'm saying right now, but I know my wife better than anyone else. I know it won't be some stupid, petty reason, and even if it is, I'll accept it. I just want to be with her for the rest of my life, come what may, that's all. Update 3. Hey folks, so 2 days have passed since the last update, and today my wife finally told me the real reason she'd been so furious about my decision to walk my niece down the aisle. And man, I don't know where to start. I can't believe she'd been carrying this secret with her for over 25 years just to maintain peace within the family. It's literally insane. This wasn't even about my niece or my daughter in the first place. This was actually all about my sister-in-law. For context, my sister-in-law, my wife, and I went to the same high school. My wife and I had known each other since middle school and started dating in our freshman year, and a few months after that, I think she became friends with my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law and I weren't particularly close, even though she and my wife were very good friends. She and I became friends only after she married my brother. Like I've already said, and she was only my wife's friend before that. They were close through college as well, and even at our wedding. My sister-in-law was a bridesmaid. In fact, that's where she first met my brother. But after our wedding, my wife started distancing herself from my sister-in-law. It was only because my brother started dating her a few months after our wedding that she and I were still involved in each other's lives, because if my wife hadn't been friends with her, I don't think I would have kept in touch with her. She's a nice person, but we weren't close back then. My brother married her a year after I married my wife, and 2 years after my wife and I had our daughter, they had theirs. Naturally, given how close my brother and I were, we'd often try to organize the play dates for our kids, but my wife never seemed interested in spending time with my brother and his family, and we'd sometimes bicker about it as well. She'd always say that she was too tired or she was too busy, but I could tell that she was just trying to make excuses to avoid hanging out with my brother and his family. So then I just visit them without her, and she'd sulk about that as well, but I couldn't help it. I needed a break sometimes. And even my daughter loved playing with her cousin. And it wasn't as if we'd meet them every other day. It would just be once or twice every 2 weeks, since they lived rather far. I didn't force her to come along since she clearly wasn't interested, and so it'd just be my brother and his wife and I hanging out. On the rare occasion that my wife did join us, she didn't talk much and would only speak to either me or my brother, or would be with the kids instead. So no matter how much we tried to make both our wives feel included, it just never worked out. My brother and I tried several times to get them to tell us the reason behind their falling out as well, but both of them had the same thing to say, that they'd just grown apart and it was awkward to be around each other now. But let's be real, that barely sounds like a genuine reason to completely start ignoring someone whom you've used to be so close with. My sister-in-law hadn't even asked my wife to be her bridesmaid at her wedding. So we knew something was really off, and I knew for a fact that something had happened around the time of our wedding. But then life happened. Our kids started growing up and our responsibilities increased as well. So we stopped seeing each other that often and stopped thinking about what had happened all those years ago, now that we had bigger problems to worry about. And today I finally learned what had led to the tension between my wife and my sister-in-law. Like I've said earlier, they used to be really good friends, but that ended around the time of our wedding. And the reason behind that was that 1 or 2 days before the wedding, when my wife and all her bridesmaids were having a little party just for themselves, my sister-in-law got blackout drunk and ended up confessing that she'd been in love with me ever since sophomore year. She'd whispered it to my wife at the time and had then even giggled about it after she'd shared her little secret, while my wife said nothing because she was horrified. She tried to dismiss it as a meaningless drunken confession that wasn't even true, but the next day, when she'd asked her about it, she'd admitted that it was true, but said that she was never going to act on it, so there was no need to make a big deal out of it. So my wife still let her be a bridesmaid because neither of them wanted to raise any unnecessary questions. They just didn't want the hassle of having to explain why my wife had made her friend a bridesmaid who wasn't a bridesmaid anymore. Needless to say, things were never the same after that, and they pretty much stopped talking after that day. But when my sister-in-law started dating my brother, my wife got insecure because she believed that she was marrying into the family just so that she could be close to me, and she couldn't stand it. Unbeknownst to us, she and my sister-in-law even got into a really nasty fight about this a few weeks before my brother's wedding. My wife had accused her of marrying my brother just so that she could be near me, since nobody just gets over someone they loved for so long in a couple of months, especially if the person they're marrying is 6 whole years older than them. But my sister-in-law insisted that she really did love my brother and their marriage had nothing to do with the past. It didn't help that my brother and I looked similar as well. That fight pretty much put an end to any hope for reconciliation, and with time, the bitterness only grew. My wife never told me any of this because she didn't want to ruin my brother's marriage, since she actually wasn't even sure if my sister-in-law still had a thing for me or not. It sure didn't feel like that to me, at least, and I guess on some level even my wife did think that maybe my sister-in-law truly did love my brother. This is why she'd made up her mind to carry this secret to the grave, no matter how insecure she felt whenever she saw me spending time with my sister-in-law. But it all came to a head last week when I told her about my decision to walk my niece down the aisle. She'd already been feeling insecure and jealous because I'd been visiting my sister-in-law after my brother's death. But unlike earlier, instead of it being my brother, my sister-in-law and me, it was just me and her. The same old ugly feelings were coming back to the surface, and she didn't know what to do with them anymore, so she suppressed them, just like she'd done earlier, but it wasn't as effective anymore. So when I came back home that day and told her that I'd be walking my niece down the aisle, she lost it. She couldn't get the image of me, my sister-in-law, and my niece as one happy family out of her head, no matter how hard she tried. She couldn't even tell me the real reason as to why she was acting out this way, and that was even more frustrating for her, so she ended up saying a lot of things that she shouldn't have. She knew that I was assuming the responsibility would have fallen to my brother, had he been alive, out of love and respect for him, and not because I suddenly reciprocated whatever feelings my sister-in-law had for me all those years ago. She just didn't know what to do with all these feelings that had been building up inside her for years and had resurfaced when she realized how my brother's passing had brought me and my sister-in-law closer together. And that was the real reason she'd reacted the way that she did. I think I must have been quiet for 10 whole minutes after she was done telling me everything, because what else could I have done? It was a lot to process at once, and in addition to that, I couldn't even fathom how my wife had kept all this to herself for the past 2 decades. I would have probably lost my mind. So I can't even imagine the mental strength needed to do something like this. She didn't want to wreck my brother's home, and that's why she'd kept such a huge secret to herself all these years. I can't believe I'm married to this incredible woman who's always put other people's feelings before her own. When I thanked her for telling me the truth and for keeping this secret for so long, she pretty much broke down in my arms, and I was there for her while she let herself cry for the first time in ages. I'm so glad that she finally told me everything. And like I'd said, I don't care what the reason was. I'd stay with her no matter what. It's been a few hours, and we haven't spoken about it since or discussed it further. I think she's too emotionally drained right now, so I'll leave it for later. Update 4. Hey everyone. So there's just a week left before my niece's wedding, and yes, I am still walking her down the aisle. Now that everything's out in the open, my wife told me that she doesn't mind. She spent enough time with the girl herself, and she knows that my niece is a good kid. She deserves to have a father figure walking her down the aisle on her special day, and it's definitely what my brother would have wanted, so she's fine with it. As for my sister-in-law, we decided to let sleeping dogs lie. We're never going to bring up the past, at least not by ourselves. My wife trusts me, and she knows I would never, ever do anything to hurt her. She apologized for whatever she'd said in that fit of rage, and now that I know the reason behind her anger, I know better than to hold that against her. And she knows better than to hold my connection with my brother's family against me. I'm still going to help her and my niece out whenever they need it, but that's about it. So we're okay on that front. This secret is going to stay between us for the rest of our lives, and we know it's all for the best. We've also decided that my wife needs to seek therapy because she tends to bottle up her feelings until she finally snaps over something really insignificant and small. She's almost 50 now, and I think it's about time we address this because I don't want her to suffer anymore. She needs to know that she doesn't always need to put on a brave face to take on the world, and she can be vulnerable, at least with me. I mean, she is sometimes, but that's only when things get too overwhelming. So I want her to know that things don't need to get that bad before she finally tells me about her problems. She agrees with me as well, and I'm glad that we're on the same page here. We're in this for the long run. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.